Here we are at the end of the Rob, you could just move that slide one, but here we are at the end of day one. And this is exciting. We have with us a phenomenal speaker and someone who has become a good friend. I know I've said that about a couple of the trainers, but Rob and I have actually done videos for his Next Level Exchange. Rob and I have done a management boot camp together that we both ran. We've gotten each other into different conferences. So we go way back now in the training world. If you haven't heard from Rob, there's no accident that I'm ending the day with Rob. I like to start and end with a bang. Rob is the man that is in charge of all of the training. He's a partner over at Next Level Exchange, which you definitely need to check out. And Rob, they hired him because he was a big MRI network guy, and he was the CLO, right, Chief Learning Officer. So you've probably know what that term is. But you can read his bio below the webinar. Make sure you click on LinkedIn, which is clinking, I guess. I just turned a new word. Click with Rob and connect on LinkedIn, and also make sure you check out his Next Level Exchanges and all that. It's really, I get great feedback from my people on the awesome training that entire site has, and I am honored actually to be a part of it. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob in a second. If you did listen to the earlier couple of sessions ago, Bob Marshall talked about NLP and elegant communication. I don't want you to think that this is a do-over or the same topic. Communication is what they have in common. I did put in in the agenda descriptions that this is a great follow-up to it because you get to use a lot of those NLP things and all of that stands. What Rob's really going to get into is really mastering the art now of communication, and in terms of really more from an objection handling perspective, and how you just deal with when you see red flags and when you get resistance, and being a great listener, and really great stuff. So that's the presentation. Let me turn it over now to the one and the only Robert Mosley.
Neil, thank you so much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor, privilege to be with you today. I'm looking forward to this particular session. You know, what's so interesting about this particular type of conversation, it is really the heart of what we do. It's the essence of working with both clients and candidates. It's about great communication and how that ultimately turns into great compensation. Now, if you think about it, when you think about the heart of dialogue, it's very much like the human heart. There are actually 4 different chambers, as you know, in the human heart, and each one of those chambers has an autonomous function. It functions as a separate entity, and yet it works together to make this amazing mechanism that feeds the entire body. Well, that's very much like the heart of great dialogue. You're going to see that there are 4 components to great communication: probing to qualify, active listening, responding, which is the 4 acronym that you see down there: build, acknowledge, support, and expand. We call those base skills, all with the idea of being able to align our message to our clients and to our candidates. So I want to take just a few minutes today and talk about each one of these important segments and how they work synchronistically to create wonderful, great communication. I want to challenge some old concepts that historically sit in our industry. You know, it's funny because very often when someone's talking about making a client call or a candidate call, they'll talk about making a presentation. And I think that's a misnomer. I think that starts us out on the wrong foot. Our work should be much more about listening and asking rather than try to tell and present. I was at my niece's birthday party the other day, and I watched them play a game that I honestly didn't know they played anymore, called Pin the Tail on the Donkey. Now, it's gotten a lot fancier, and the donkey looks a lot more slick than when I was a child, but the principle's still the same. You get blindfolded, you get turned around, and then you do your best to try and stick that tail on the donkey. Well, I sat there and watched it, and I thought, oh my gracious, that's exactly what we try to do sometimes as recruiters, as marketers. We blindfold ourselves, we get spun around because we're so busy, and then we just try to say something to make it stick on the wall so that it'll hopefully get some kind of traction. Well, here's the good news. You don't have to be blindfolded. You don't have to be spun around. You can actually look to see by asking great qualifying questions and then listening with the intent. So this idea of trying to make something stick by saying hopefully the right thing, it really creates a lot of challenges in our industry. When you present too early, how do you even know that those are the questions your client or candidates wants answered, or that that's what's on their mind, or they can even connect what it is you're talking about with what's really an issue important to them? The second concept I want to challenge is what we call overzealous persuasion. Historically, there was this flawed traditional mindset that says, well, everyone's a prospect, and they just don't know it yet, and anyone can be sold. Well, no, they aren't, and no, you don't want to. A flawed emphasis on trying to overcome or persuade or convince or persist really drives people just the opposite direction. Because what they're feeling is, wow, why is this guy pushing so hard? Whose interest is he really looking out for? He must really need to make his quota this month. So this idea of trying to just tell somebody with more enthusiasm actually sometimes takes us the other direction. Overzealous persuaders can often trick in reactions that tend to close down communication and can often alienate clients and candidates. So I want to take these 4 segments and break them down a little bit. And while I know you look at this and you think, well, Rob, this is common sense. Well, that may be true. I just find that our industry, common sense is not always common practice. So I'm going to challenge you again to look at this material through new eyes to see if there's something you can't learn to be better at. And by the way, for most of the people on this call, this isn't necessarily about teaching you a new skill. It's about helping you to be more aware of the skills that you already possess. So I'm going to talk about this idea of skillful, purposeful probing. Now, do you have to ask skillful, purposeful questions of all your clients and candidates? No, just the ones you want to keep. The reality is we either differentiate ourselves by our approach or we get forced to differentiate by our price. And when we're talking about your approach, we're talking about largely the ability to ask great questions beyond the obvious. Now, if you think about in service of wanting to deepen the relationship, drive more depth and breadth in client and candidate relationships, well, you look at those 4 factors, and you notice that at the bottom is trust. It is the foundation. And these days, it doesn't take people very long to decide whether they trust or don't trust you or your message. And of course, a strong message of value is going to help drive more respect, more legitimacy in the relationship. And that's going to help people be more comfortable with you and like you a little bit more and enjoy their time with you. And all those things together start to drive the awareness of value, both positionally, what the client or candidate needs because of their position, and their personal needs, how they want to be treated or regarded. So when you think about the probing spectrum, I know historically, as a young sales associate, I learned the probing funnel. Nothing wrong with that, where you kind of start with these open-ended questions and you drill down to hopefully what you think with that closing question, which was something like, will you buy for me? Not a bad approach, but I really think it is more like a probing spectrum. Think about probing questions like musical notes on a page, right? A phrase of music. There's high notes and low notes and short notes and long notes. And the more you mix those up, the more interesting the song. So I want to be able to be more skillful and purposeful with my questions by working the entire spectrum. So I want to start with some good open questions. What's most important to you? What are you trying to achieve? How are you going to make this decision? What are your concerns, right? And the great thing about open questions is that it drives more conversation. The challenging part about just having open-ended questions is that it can sound like I'm not sure that I know where I'm going with the conversation. So I also want to make sure I have some good closed-ended questions that are going to close down and restrict the range, right? I typically am going to get more of a yes or no kind of response, right? So, and in between those sit in something I call fact-finding questions, which help me, in effect, double-click on those questions. So I may take a simple question. Are you the decision maker? Closed probe. Who in addition to yourself is part of this decision? Open probe. Who in addition to yourself is part of this decision, and do you have a time frame in which you'd like to see this search begin? That's that fact-finding kind of piece. And the more you can drive those messages, the more insight you're going to be able to get from the conversations. And so when you take those ideas, what we're really trying to gather is not information. It's funny because I know a lot of us have a form that we call a needs analysis or an information form. And information's fine, but I think in the first 6 months of your business, most of us know how to gather information. I don't think that's the tough piece. And by the way, I want both quality and quantity in information. And so we practice something called a 3x3 strategy, which helps take information and help me understand the indicators and the implications to actually get me insight. And when you think of insight, I want you to think of information beyond the obvious. Right? It's like that tip of the iceberg is information, but you see all this mass down below. That's where the insight lies. And a 3x3 strategy says that I want to, in a perfect world, have 3 relationships in an organization at a minimum at 3 different levels of the organization. One at the executive level, one at the management, or departmental level, and one at the individual project or field layer. And of course, I'm trying to understand what are the implications? What could this information mean? What are the possibilities? What are the consequences of my client or candidate acting or not acting on it? What are the indicators? What am I hearing or seeing that's either supporting or conflicting this new information? And multiple relationships gives me multiple insight. Multiple insight gives me influence. And insight and influence always swim upstream together or down. The more information I know about you, your role, your title, your world, the more influential I'm going to be with you, and the more you're going to give me insight into other factors in your organization. So think about this 3x3 strategy for just a moment. If I look at any organization, whether it be the Exxon Mobils of this world or mom and pop's store down the street, they all have 3 layers: the executive layer, the management or departmental layer, and then, of course, the individual project or field. And I want you to think about just for a second what type of titles you would typically aspire to call on at the executive level. It might be a CEO, business owner, managing partner, managing director, CIO, CFO, vice president sales, vice president marketing. And then I get down to the management and departmental layer, right? And that's the directors of. Sometimes it might be a vice president or a manager. And then, of course, the bottom layer would be individual field people, maybe engineers, maybe salespeople, maybe admin, maybe sales or service support. And you think about each one of those individuals looks through a different lens. Executives tend to look out 1 to 3 years, and they're more focused on goals and objectives. Well, that gets pushed down to the management departmental layer, who tend to think in terms of months and quarters, and they have to be able to recognize what kind of problems and challenges the executive layer goals and objectives set for them, and that gets pushed down to what most of us would be, individual project or field, in terms of what I need to do to help my organization achieve its goals and solve its problems, and what my piece of the puzzle is. And most people at the individual project or field layer tend to think in terms of a month to 90 days, right? 1 to 90 days. So as you look at this, understand that it's powerful to have a relationship at each one of these levels. Now, my parent company owns Next Level Exchange, and the CEO of that company is a gentleman named Jeff Kay. Now, Jeff Kay is not an easy guy to get a hold of. He's a very busy man, and if you were trying to call him from the outside, it might be pretty tough, unless you know Heather. Heather is the director of First Impressions. Now, you might call her a gatekeeper. She doesn't see herself that way. She says, my job is to make sure that the calls that come into Jeff have value for Jeff. And if you know the right questions to ask Heather, she'll open up the keys to the kingdom. She will give you access. So there is that perfect example of someone at the individual project or field basis being critical for insight and access to the executive layer. Now, this is a fun role, and I'll share where we're going to go with this from here. I want you to pick a title that you would aspire to call on, and preferably at the executive level. And if you don't call it that level, then someone at the management or departmental level. And I'll pick the CEO as an example. Now, there's a gentleman named Ram Charan, and he wrote a great book called What the CEO Wants You to Know. And while he focused on the CEO, the exercise involved in this can fit at any title at any level. And what it says is, if I want to be more influential, speaking to the executive or management level, I have to speak their language and see through their lens. And so what he said about a CEO is, if I were getting ready to call a CEO, and hopefully I would have done some prep and some homework, but if I didn't, how would I want to start the conversation? What would I want to tell that CEO about what I know about them? And even if you don't know their name or something specifically about them, what we know is that they're measured in a certain way. All CEOs are measured in a certain way. Among the key buckets or indicators is cash generation, growth of their organization, profitability of the organization, velocity, that's speed to market, current industry trends, and of course the image of the company as a whole, which has an impact. Well, and if you took a CIO, it might have some of these same things, but it's going to have a whole nother list of categories that are unique to a CIO or a VP of marketing. So what I'd like you to do is take that title, and here's the good news, you only have to do it once, but spend some time. If you were to pick 6 buckets, think of it this way. Every day when that person gets up, by their title, what are they looking at to let them know that their company is on track? What are the things that keep them up at night? That's what this list is about. And what I want you to do with this list is make sure that you start infusing those things into your early conversation. I want us to stop talking about need all the time and start talking about, here's what I know about you, Ms. CEO or Mr. CEO. I know these things are important, and here's how what I do, right, in the recruiting or the staffing industry helps you with these 6 buckets. And it could be just 1 or 2 of those. But I want to tie in what's important to that person to aligning to what I do to be able to help them achieve their business goals or solve their business problems. If we'll stop talking about need and start talking about what causes the need, goals and objectives of the organization, and problems and challenges, you're going to magnify the need. You're going to be able to tie your solution in much tighter. Now, once you have this insight, once you know it, and if you know it specifically about that organization, that's great. If it's just general, that's fine. Here's how you infuse it into an opening voicemail or email. I'm going to share with you quickly a model called the I model. And I like this because it's the science of opening a conversation. Now, I like to use it on the client side, and that's the example I'm going to give you. What you should know is this does also work on the candidate side. The insight you share is different, but it still works. I'm just going to use this today on the client side as an example. And what it says is whether you're writing an email or leaving a voicemail or having a live conversation that's back and forth with somebody, this is a great roadmap to follow to show that you have clarity of purpose in your conversation. Now, what I'll share with you right now is that the average recruiter on the average day, the average marketer, right, the average consultant, skips step 2 and goes from 1 right to 3. And that's the problem. They go right from here's who I am and let me tell you. And I'm going to suggest that's not the best way to open a conversation. And you'll see here where we go with it. And this is one of those things, again, that looks like common sense. It's just so not common practice. So let me walk through these steps just to give you an idea. Now, we all know what a good introduction should be. I'm going to suggest that it be less, that less is more. Rather than going into introduction and immediately start talking to them about you or your firm or your opportunity, I want you to be very simple and very straightforward. I'm with. What's happening in the first couple of seconds is your prospect is thinking, who are you? What do you do? So I want you to be short and sweet. Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples, and those 3 examples have a different style. So this is not a script. I'm not trying to script you. I'm just giving you examples, and I want you to write your own. I want you to add your style to this science. And you see in some situations we use a formal last name, and some it's an informal first name. That just is going to depend upon your industry and your particular niche. But look in all 3 of these cases, it's straightforward. I'm with. Now, the reason why I don't want to tell them anything more, you notice that's not about a list of clients or relationships. I don't want to be innocuous, right? I don't want to let them know who I'm not. I just want to make sure I'm being very straightforward. And you notice, too, in these 3 examples, the first one is in biopharma, right? The second one is an example that's in banking. And the third example is in healthcare. And throughout this next few slides on the I model, you'll notice I'll stay with the continuation of those 3 relationships. So it works across the board regardless of the industry you're in. Now, the reason I want to have a quick introduction, right? And the other thing, too, I want to make sure I avoid saying these things. Touching base, checking in, or saying anything that can be said by the next 10 recruiters who'll be calling on your client. We only represent the top 5% of candidates in our industry. Well, who's going to say I represent the bottom 5? It's not that it's not true. It's just that it's not yet relevant. Right? So we're going to be quick to this. I'm with, and that allows us to get to this important key segment, which is sharing insight, right? And what you want to be able to do is give that person insight to what you know about them or their role or their responsibility or their organization or their industry. And any insight's better than none. And what you're trying to do is answer this question that they're thinking, maybe not saying it. What do you know about me? Right? What do you know about my business? What do you know about my world? And yes, I will be the only trainer to ever quote Zsa Zsa Gabor on sales. But I like this quote. I think it's great. She said, but enough about me, darling. Let's talk about you. What do you know about me? I think that's brilliant. I think that's exactly what our clients and candidates are thinking. They want to know that you know something about them. And you know, this is about human behavior. Have you ever had somebody walk up to you in a party and they know you or they know your family, something about you, and you automatically like them more because they know you? Well, we're taking that same psychology and driving it here. So immediately I'm going to go to, here's what I know about you or your organization. And again, I've gone back to these 3 examples. The first one, biopharma. The second is the banking. And the third is healthcare. And you see then all 3 of these, they're sharing something they know. Now, it could be something a little more obvious, like I understand, through a recent article that you've just become the vice president of sales. That's not bad, but I think the stronger the insight, the more impression you're going to be, the more right you're going to have a substantive conversation. But in all 3 of these examples, what they're saying is, here's what I know about you or your role or your market. That then earns you the right, to ask some good questions and position your value proposition and why what you do helps them achieving either their business goals or solving their business problems. And this is where you get to have that what I call that inspirational statement about your value proposition. Right? And what you're trying to do is answer the prospect's question: why is this conversation of value to me? Right? And I always like to think about it this way: when I'm coming up with an objective for a call, the call is around my value proposition. What is it that I want my client or candidate to do as a result of our conversation? Think about that again. What is it that I want my client or my candidate to do as a result of this business conversation? That's your value proposition. Here's some examples, again, of what that might look like. The first example is biopharma. Second is banking. Third is around healthcare. But you see that in each one of these situations, they are positioning their value proposition based on what they know about that client or candidate or their roles or responsibilities. It's a key connect. That then earns you the right to ask for some investment, some time typically, and you want it to be mutual, and you want it to be specific: who, what, when, where, and how. And what you're really doing is answering the prospect's question: what is it you want from me? What is it you want me to do next? Right? And you see in all three of these examples, it typically is about time and about an investment of some resources, whether it be on a phone or whether you're actually walking your territory and you'll be in their in community. It all works, but you see in each one of these, it's coming up with that rationale of why we should spend time together. And what I really like about this I model, it's simple and fast. It's not any longer, I promise you, than the email or voicemail you're currently leaving. It's just dropping in that critical insight piece. Here's what I know about you and your organization. Here's why a conversation would be of value based on what I know and understand. I challenge you to give it a try. You'll like it. But that's how you start to share insight. Well, what I'm trying to do with this I model is earn the right to have a valuable, substantive conversation. And it earns me the right to begin to qualify. Now, we all know you can't always get the answers you need in one phone conversation. And we want to be able to identify as quickly as possible: is there potential on this account? What's the probability that I can move this account forward? And how much time do I have to be able to do this, or how much time do I not have? And what you see in front of you is another wonderful L.A.C.E.S model. L.A.C.E.S, by the way, is our business partner, literally presence around the world, 88 countries, 5 continents. So I'm going to share you that this next segment that I'm talking about is one of the most proven business principles around. And there's actually a handout that I'll be glad to provide you all that gives you some examples of some great qualifying questions. And we call this a sales window. And if you look at each one of the panes, you notice the top left-hand pane is about questions around goals, around challenges, problems, and around need. And remember this: needs never stand alone. Behind every need, there's always a business goal to achieve or a business problem to solve. So you want to be able to ask those questions in concert. Then financial factors. Well, that's about compensation. That's about budget. Options. Now, we consider it competition, but your clients and candidates just look at it as all options. They have an option to work with you. They have an option to work with someone else. They have an option to do it totally in-house. And then, of course, decision process. And you notice that timing is a critical factor that walks around all all 4 of those windows and components, because there's timing to goals, problems, need. There's timing to financial factors, to options, and the decision process. So one of the best things we can do is to start asking great questions beyond the obvious. And I want to challenge you to take 2 good questions every week, one around goals, one around problems, one around need, one around options, and start slowly infusing them into your business conversation and see if you don't start to get better traction and better responses. So again, when you see this list of qualifying questions, make sure you highlight them, pick a few, and start infusing them into your conversations with both clients and with candidates. Now, there are some additional techniques that I think are a lot of fun. We get so used to asking the same questions, and so I think sometimes too our clients and candidates have become pretty savvy, and they kind of know what's coming down the pike. So I like to shake up the tree a little bit and shake up the branches. And so there are different techniques to help you ask a question differently. I think it's also important to give somebody an idea, a rationale for why we need to ask the question. We understand it, but sometimes our clients and candidates don't really understand the context or rationale for them being able to respond appropriately. So this first technique is called context or rationale. And as you read it, what you see is it's giving those people that rationale for why you're asking. So Mr. Client, knowing that this search has to pay for itself and we're going to be held accountable, how will you track and measure the success of this placement? Right? Or, so Tom, I know that you're not ready today to make a critical move, but when that time comes, I'm confident that we can give you insight to prepare you to be more savvy, educated, and prepared for the opportunity presented, or rationale, context. There's also a technique called perspective or opinion. And I like this because it personalizes it, right? It makes it valuable to that individual. So Sally, from your perspective, is it more important? Tom, you've worked with this team before. In your opinion, Neil, I'd value your insight. Why do you think? Would you share in your experience? It's a great way to personalize a question. And then here's another technique. Now, historically, you've probably seen this technique used in closes. Good option. I think it works very well, though, in guiding the conversation without trying to manipulate the conversation. And it, in effect, is giving a client or a candidate some options. So would you say that the quality of candidate or the time to hire is more important on this particular search? Will your decision to move forward be today, or do you think it'll be later this week? So do you think the salary increase will be $10,000, or do you think it will be higher? Again, just a simple way to guide the conversations. Now, there's also things called probing for symptoms. And I like this because it helps us deep dive into the conversation. It's like double clicking and opening up another door or another window. Again, great techniques to help you ask the same types of questions in a slightly different way to be able to get a different kind of response. So when we think about going back to this heart of the dialogue, probe, listening, and base, the reality is that nothing is solved by asking great qualifying questions if we don't have the ability to actively listen. Now, I think a lot of us do a good job of hearing. I don't think we necessarily really know how to listen. And I'll be honest. I think if I were to suggest to you all that we all go attend a 2-day listening seminar, I think you'd lose the will to live. It's not the sexiest thing we do, but you got to know it is ground zero when it comes to huge communication skills. And I love what Stephen Covey said: seek first to understand, then to be understood. And real active listening is the process of temporarily setting everything aside. You're not preparing to respond. You're just listening to the other person's message, not evaluating, not deciding, not reacting. Guys, that's a tough gig in our industry because we've all been taught, quite honestly, counterintuitively, to be prepared to overcome the objection, right? And to be prepared to respond. And I'm going to ask you not to. I'm going to ask you just to be in the moment, right? This listening is such a powerful tool if we can do it well. So let's take just a minute and talk about what would be an active indicator to show that we're listening to our clients and our candidates. Part of that is displaying patience. Let's be honest, most of us walk into a phone conversation and we've got our agenda. And when we've got our agenda, we sometimes can end up over-talking the candidate or client, interrupting, asking irrelevant questions, asking questions that are only important to us. And so much about being a good consultant is about our ability to display patience. Now, do something for me if you would. Write this down. And I'm sure none of us, but write down some things, 3 to 5 things that would show that we might not have patience. What behaviors might we be doing? I'll share one that I know I tend to do. I tend to multitask. While someone's coming in, I'll be on my phone and texting while I'm talking to them, which doesn't show that I'm being very patient. It also doesn't show that I'm listening. So things like that. So list 3 to 5, right? And then I want you to pick one of those that you know you might be guilty of, and I want you to commit to stopping that behavior for 30 days and get an accountability partner. Find somebody and say, here's the deal. I need to be a better listener, and I need to be more patient in this area, and I'm going to focus on it. Will you hold me accountable for that one skill for the next 30 days? So when we're talking about listening guidelines, here are some things you might want to think about. Again, common sense, not common practice, that will help you be more in the moment with someone. Listening without trying to tell or decide. Using a neutral tone of voice. Maintaining good eye contact and relaxed posture. And when you're on the phone, that's about focus. Not listening autobiographically. Now I'll tell you what that kind of means. I think sometimes we want to relate, and we relate to someone by telling them something about us. And what it actually does is shut down the conversation. I was this last holiday season, we went out to go snow skiing in Colorado, and I had a friend of mine who was a good friend who was trying to relate, and he goes, "Oh yeah, well, I'm taking my family. We're going to Switzerland for 10 days." I'm like, "Dude, I got nothing on that." And he was trying to relate, but the truth is, it completely stopped the conversation, right? And so sometimes here's what it sounds like in our world. "Oh, Mr. Candidate, I know exactly how you feel." Well, no, you may not. And I'm not sure I'd want to communicate that. So listening autobiographically in our world when it's really important to listen is not such a smart thing. Ask more open-ended questions. Make sure you're reframing for clarity, right? So just to make sure I understand, Mr. Candidate, you're saying the following things. To trust and verify, not listen to try to manipulate or persuade. Guys, this stuff is just as important at home. We can't practice something different at home from what we practice in our work life. And this last one, which I love, which is go through the doors that your clients and candidates open. Now, let me give you an example of what that means. So let me give you let's go back into our office environment, and let's say we all work for one big giant team, and we're working with that guy Rob, and Rob is a project coordinator, and he's kind of frustrating us, and so you hear this complaint about Rob in the corridors of our office firm. You know, Rob is always late with completing reference checks on candidates that I need at the end of our client interview process. And his excuse is that people in the office are constantly interrupting him. Well, that's a typical complaint. And if I were the average manager, my response might be this. Well, here's what you tell Rob, or let me tell you what to do. Well, that's one approach. But the truth is, people learn better if they learn to think for themselves. So just by asking some great questions about this situation, if I'm a good manager, just asking some questions opens up at least 4 different doors. Look at the doors I can open by asking great questions and listening. Door number 1 is about Rob. Well, it sounds like there's an inefficient pattern here. What do you think could be done to help Rob? Or I could pick door number 2, which is about the client interview process. Well, why is Rob having to wait till the end of the interview process to take a first round of reference checks? Or I could pick door number 3, which is about reference check delegation. Well, is there someone in addition to Rob that might be able to assist in getting these reference checks completed in a timely fashion? Or I could pick door number 4, which is about the interruptions themselves. Well, it sounds like Rob's work area is pretty busy. What do you think we could do to reduce his interruptions? There's also a universal door, the door I call the door of empathy. Wow, you seem really frustrated by this. What do we need to do to alleviate your frustrations? It's such a powerful skill. It says, I'm listening and I want to understand. So we take the third piece of this 4-part puzzle, which is about base skills. Now, base skills are amazing. They are powerful but subtle influencing skills, and there are 4 of them: build, acknowledge, support, and expand. And this is another powerful L.A.C.E.S tool. And you think about it, right? If you think about the opposite of love, you might say hate. Well, I'm going to disagree. I think the opposite of love is probably indifference. And I'm going to suggest that resistance for us is probably a good thing, because when people are resistant, we at least know where they are in their positioning. And when people are resistant, right, or I think that I might be getting some resistance, I want to acknowledge, I want to recognize that. I hear you. I understand your concern. When I'm hearing potential acceptance, I want to be able to support and reinforce that, right? And then, of course, we can build on to both of those. So I'll give you 2 examples of this just to get an idea of what it looks like. I was out with a friend of mine, a female friend who had just come into this country out of Great Britain. She really didn't know anybody, so she didn't have her driver's license yet. So she asked me to go take her to go to the mall to go shopping. She wanted to get a dress. So I'm doing the whole guy thing, right, sitting in the dressing room, and she walks up and she tries it on. She looks up and she says, well, how does this make me look? Do you like this, right? That's a very typical comment. And she looked great. So I get to support it. Boy, Helen, that looks great. That dress is very attractive on you. And then I get to build and encourage, right? As a matter of fact, I like those shoes you tried on earlier. I think those would look really good together. Now, that's simple, but we all want to know we're doing the right thing. And that's all the more important with clients and candidates who want to know that the decisions they are making are smart, right, and are good decisions. And that's where you support and you build. Now, that one's not really as tough as the acknowledgement piece, right, where you acknowledge and you expand when you're hearing resistance. And the idea about expanding is guiding. The average recruiter on the average day doesn't acknowledge. They go right into, let me tell you. Or they'll say this, well, yeah, I hear you, but. No, no buts. And by the way, however is just a fancy but. Take but and take however completely out of your conversation, and guide, suggest alternatives. And again, these look very, very simple, but they are so powerful and influential when done correctly. And the benefits of these base skills is it helps guide the sales dialogue without manipulating. It communicates that you're listening actively and empathically. It keeps us from sounding like we're interrogating clients and candidates. It also keeps us from talking too soon and too much. It also starts to influence people's perception, how they see us and how they think about us, and it also intensifies the need. Well, that brings us to this fourth component, which is around responding, but also around the idea of being able to align, alignment. And, and you know, it's so funny. When we think about this historically, we call it overcoming objections. And I don't know how this got started, but in our world of sales, somehow we became very warlike and militaristic with our terms. All right, Rob, I want you to get in there and I want you to target that market. I want you to penetrate that account. And I want you to overcome that objection. Ladies and gentlemen, if I'm your client or your candidate, I'm not fired up about being targeted, penetrated, and overcome. I am interested in being listened to, and I certainly want to be consulted with and advised. And so the words we utilize are important in terms of aligning our meaning and our intentions with clients and candidates. And when you think about resistance, resistance actually comes in three different forms. It's either a misperception, and by the way, by definition, no one knows they have a misperception. And people don't want to be told that they're wrong. So I'm going to clarify a misperception or a missing perception that a client or candidate might have about me or my firm or my role. Or it could be a skepticism. Now, next to skepticism, you want to write down the word credibility, legitimacy. It's when someone says something like this, you know, I'm skeptical that you've got the local resources to help us fill this position in the time we need it. Right? Or it could be a factual concern. Now, that's different from misperceptions and skepticisms in that it's something that's very real and it happened, and it has to be handled differently. Now, you're thinking, Rob, why do I have to go through all this? Resistance is resistance. Well, no, it's not. And the challenge is, if you fail to properly size or source the type of resistance you're hearing, we run the risk of either overreacting to it, and then we seem defensive, or we may underreact. Well, that's really going to tick somebody off because it sounds like we don't care or we don't understand what's going on. So you want to be able to size and source this. Now, let me give you some examples of what misperceptions might sound like on the client side. Right? Well, you know, staffing companies just encourage the candidates to ask for more money so they can make more money. Well, you guys are just going to work harder for the company that pays you the most money. You guys all work off the same database for your candidates. All agencies are the same. You know, contract staffing isn't a cost-effective alternative. Those are either missing or misperceptions, and they can be clarified by asking additional information and providing clarification. There's the candidate misperception on this side. Well, you guys only represent the interest of the client, not me and my family. I've heard bad things about experiences with working with staffing firms. You guys just make more money when I make less money, right? Or you don't represent the better opportunities in the marketplace, only the ones where the client can't find their own people. Again, it's the opportunity to acknowledge and to clarify the misperception. Well, that's different from a skepticism, and as you read through this, you can get an idea of what a skepticism sounds like. And again, think about this. If they're questioning your legitimacy or credibility, I don't really think you guys have the global, national, local expertise in my industry. I'm not sure that an agency can really ever fully understand our environment, culture, or needs, right? And by the way, that also might be a misperception, which is why you have to ask great clarifying, qualifying questions to understand what's happening here. Or this next one, I'm skeptical that we need to increase our rates for this type of candidate, right? We don't want to throw our developer pay out of scale. I don't think you can find the people we need with the level of experience, unique qualifications, and how do I know that this candidate is who they say they are? And there's the candidate side skepticisms, right? Well, I'm skeptical you guys would represent my best interest on your discussions with the client. I like my current work, and I doubt you could offer any type of opportunity that would be better. I'm skeptical about your legitimacy. And then, of course, the last thing you have is real concerns. And the reason why these are different is because they are real, and they're not going to go away. So you have to handle them in a two-part response. First part is to go pull back to the big picture, not try to get myopic with them and argue with them because that's not going to do any good. And then the second thing is to suggest a partnership on how we move together moving forward. So here you see some example of the client concerns and then the candidate concerns on the other side. And it's just a more gentle type of response. Again, the two-part to managing a real factual concern is to pull back to the big picture, a larger issue, not a smaller one, and to suggest a partnership moving forward. Expand to suggest a partnership. Now, the tool for responding that says, I'm listening, I want to understand, and I need to know more about your world is a tool we call L.A.C.E.S. And there's 5 parts to L.A.C.E.S. Listen, not just for what's being said, but the feeling, the empathic piece. To acknowledge, which is satisfying the individual's fundamental need for recognition. You're not agreeing with them. You're just communicating that you either understand or you want to understand. That earns you the right to ask some great clarifying questions. And you can't ask too many clarifying questions to ensure that you know their position before moving forward. because the more questions you ask, the more information, the more insight you're going to get back. And that's going to give you some opportunities to suggest some alternatives, to expand the dialogue, different approaches, different recommendations. And of course, it just increases your ROI on getting agreement, some common ground to move forward. This is a great tool. If you're not the best listener, it helps you fake it till you make it. And I'm going to challenge you to take this tool and use it in the following client and candidate red flags. So what I've done here is to provide some scenarios that I'm sure you'll all recognize. And in this scenario, what I'm going to challenge you to do is take this back to your office and role play. You'll need someone to volunteer to be the client. Someone needs to volunteer to be the consultant. And I always like to have one or two what I call observer coaches, some people that are going to give me some feedback. So what you see in these following slides are some red flag scenarios, and I call them that because there's resistance or potential resistance, and how I respond to that by listening, by acknowledging, by asking great clarifying questions. Expanding is either going to drive the dialogue forward or destroy it. So here's the red flags on the client side. The first one, the client insists on a lower rate from your organization based on their belief that your competition's offering lower rates, and they also want a conversion fee removed from the contract. This client red flag. This client agrees to a 30-day payment term, but now they want to increase payment terms to 60 days, or else they want to disengage from the assignment. This hiring authority is insistent that you follow their process on the assignment, which has some challenges. You won't have access to the ultimate decision maker, and HR wants to review all candidates before being sent on to the ultimate hiring authority. And then the last one, this client wants to see multiple candidates before they make any decisions or provide feedback. There's also an issue with response time in providing feedback. Now, here's what's really funny about this, guys, and I promise you we'll end up doing this. I was with a tenured group of consultants the other day. I walked through this program. I walked through the L.A.C.E.S model, and we listened to the first-person role play. He was a great guy, but he was tenured, but he was just so used to being on automatic pilot that he went in right to it at the end of this. He went right into, let me tell you. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't acknowledge. The client made the comment. The client played the role play, made the comment, and he went right into, well, no, that's not what we do. Let me tell you. And that's exactly what I don't want you to do. So, guys, as your observer coach, watch the role play, and if your consultant goes right into tell mode, stop them, let them try it again, because what we're looking for is those essential pieces in the L.A.C.E.S called acknowledge and asking some great clarifying questions. Okay? Then we've got some candidate red flags as well. This candidate refuses to complete a technical evaluation required by the client prior to an interview request. They want to know why. They're skeptical. They have unrealistic compensation expectations. They're not providing reference information unless an interview is scheduled, and they refuse to give the client names, stated that this is confidential information. This candidate refuses to meet you for a new application interview, even after you offer to buy them some coffee somewhere close to location. So they're just different ways of managing different types of individuals and personalities and how you work through those conversations. And then the last piece of this, observer coaches, I want you to follow this model. First, always start with what to keep. What did the account executive, what did the recruiter do really well on this conversation? And I want you to be very, very specific. How well do they follow the L.A.C.E.S model? What behaviors do they exhibit? And then what to change or do different. What might you have said or done differently in the conversation, or perhaps added, omitted, that would have made a difference? Now, I know a lot of people say, role play is just not for me, and I'm not comfortable with it. And the reality is I do much better in real life. Well, no, you don't. The way we practice is the way we play. And it's so critical to be able to practice these role plays in a safe, comfortable environment, because I'll bet you that every one of you has heard each one of these red flags on both the client and the candidate scenarios before. We deal with them on a daily basis. And your ability to know and practice and be comfortable, both with a skill set and a mindset going to these conversations, is just absolutely critical. The way we practice is the way we play. That way, when you do have the conversations with clients and candidates, when it really does count, you're going to feel more prepared and more professional in your responses. So this role play, L.A.C.E.S, the qualifying questions, these situations will all be available to you later on the session, and I really would encourage you to take these on and take an entire week just to spend 15 minutes role-playing every morning. It's like warming up and stretching before you go out and run. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been awesome spending time with you. I certainly appreciate it. For more information on our program, Next Level Exchange, I'd encourage you to come take a tour. We have several colleagues who can take you through an absolute free 20-minute guided visual tour. And at the end of that, they'll give you the system for a couple of weeks just to leverage. No other investment required on your part. but I think you'd enjoy. If you like this session today, I think you'd benefit tremendously from a visit with us at Next Level Exchange. And Neil, a particular thank you to you, my friend and colleague, for allowing us to be a part of this event.
Well, it is my honor to have you. And I want to say something to everyone listening. You know, do everything that Rob said. Just try to speed up your pace, because I know Rob talks so slowly that it's intimidating to you. I'm being sarcastic, Rob. You guys got like 5 hours worth of content in 45 minutes. That's how much he packs into his presentation. So good stuff, Rob. We're going to see you tomorrow. And if you liked Rob, he's got a great stuff coming up mañana on the client partnership, which is chock full of great stuff. I've done that with him live, and I've seen him keynote it as well. And it's super fun, too. So, Rob, thanks so much for your time, and we'll catch you mañana.